Hello friends, this is David Heron, the Green Transportation Examiner, and I want to talk today about evaluating your home electricity service for installing an electric car. And so I'm outside to show a couple things, and it has to do with something that's behind this bush right here. So let's start with the issue. You have an electric car, and maybe you've been using a regular power outlet to charge the car, but you want to move to a full powered charging station. So one of the first things you have to do is to evaluate the electrical service at your house. And the reason for doing that is to determine whether you need to upgrade the electrical service. And in my case, the electrical service is in a service panel that's behind this bush, which is why I'm out here. But let's start with something important. Is this up here is the transformer that serves my neighborhood, and the wire that serves the house, it comes right here. Okay, both of those are a limit to how much electricity can be brought into this house. But the main limit is the service panel. And in my case, the service panel is buried way behind this kumquat tree and this rose bush. To get to that, let's get it out of the way, and I'll stop the recording for now and take care of that. Okay, so I've gotten things out of the way so we can take a look at this. This is the electricity meter, and apparently on this there is some kind of label showing how much power it's able to handle. Electricity power is measured in amps. So there, yeah, I mean, the service is 240 volts, but the capacity is rated in amps. So that's what we need to look at down here. Is each of these are the circuit breakers that govern how much electricity is available at the house. So at the top is the master circuit breaker, and somewhere on there, but I don't see it, and whatever, but somewhere on there is the maximum rating for the master circuit breaker. And then below that are the circuit breakers for each circuit. So you can see there the numbers. Like there's one on the left that's 30, and then 15, then 15, then 20. And then on the right it's 40, and then 20, then 20. So that means 2 large circuits for 30 and then 40 amps, and then below that is 5 circuits of either 15 or 20 amps depending on the circuit. So the way you determine the capacity is first you look at the one at the top to find out how many amps it is, and then you add up the ones at the bottom to see the total number that's assigned. So we have 70 plus 40 is 110, plus 30 is 140, plus 20 is 160 assigned. So we have 160 amps assigned on this service panel, and if I could see the rating on the top, I could tell if there was any remaining capacity. So say the one at the top is 200 amps. Okay, which it might be. So that means there would be 40 amps of service capacity remaining. So the reason this is important is if you're talking about adding a charging station, a full powered charging station for an electric car, you're going to be adding electricity usage to your house. And so to do that, you need capacity in the service panel, which again is way back here behind all this, the service panel. And as I just calculated, possibly this service panel has 40 amps of remaining capacity. So that would be enough for one 32 amp or 6 kilowatt charging station. Okay, so let's wrap this up and summarize what we just went over. Okay, so we've had fun out in the looking at the service panel. So let's wrap up. So the purpose for looking at the service panel was gauging electrical capacity of the service panel and whether adding an electric car charging station will exceed that capacity or be within that capacity. So let's review what we've learned. So first off, we learned about the capacity for wiring, for circuit breakers, etc., to carry electricity. This capacity is measured in amps. The measurement is ampacity, or the number of amps that a circuit, a wire, a circuit breaker, etc., the number of amps that it can carry, the capacity for carrying current. It's measured as the maximum current that a conductor or a circuit can carry continuously without exceeding its temperature rating. So buried in that is an observation that when you pass current through a wire, there is inevitably a little bit of heating, and that's because every wire has some resistance, and the resistance causes the heating as the current passes through the wire. What does this mean to keep electricity use within the ratings of the circuit? Each component in an electric circuit is rated for a maximum number of amps it can safely carry. And the current, or the amps, must be less than the weakest component in the circuit. So you might have a circuit of 10 components, 9 of which are rated for 80 amps, but if one of them is rated for 20 amps, then 20 amps is the maximum. What's called an overcurrent protection device, or a circuit breaker, those are used to ensure that the current load does not go above the ratings of the weakest component. The idea is for the circuit breaker to detect that the load has gone too high and pop the circuit rather than risk having an electrical fire. And then another issue that applies to electric vehicle charging is what's called a continuous load. A continuous load is electricity usage that lasts for more than an hour. When you have a continuous load situation, the current must be limited to 80% of the rating of the weakest component in the circuit. Electric vehicle charging is a continuous load because it usually lasts for more than an hour. So that means if we have a 20 amp circuit, we must limit the charging rate to 16 amps. If we have a 30 amp circuit, limit it to 24 amps, and so on, as you see in this table. Let's talk about the calculation we did outside at the service panel. What we did was calculate what I'm calling assigned capacity. Now this is an extremely simplified calculation, and it doesn't take into account many variables, but the calculation is fairly straightforward. The total capacity is the rating of the master circuit breaker. So we're assuming that the master circuit breaker was properly sized to match the sizing of the wire going from the utility and also the capacity available through the local transformer. The master circuit breaker will have fit within that capacity. Now the assigned capacity is the sum of the ratings of each circuit, or rather the rating of each circuit breaker for each circuit. Again, we're assuming that the electrician who did the installation of the electrical surface at the house correctly sized the circuit breaker for the ratings of wiring and the electrical outlets in each circuit. So then the remaining capacity is simply the total capacity minus the assigned capacity. I said this is extremely simplified because you're obviously not going to have every single last device in your house turned on at the same time. So that means you're unlikely to reach a situation where the total capacity is being consumed in the house. If you look into what electricians do, they calculate what's called a load calculation, which is a better estimate of what the maximum load will be in a particular house. And when they consider adding a new device like a charging station to a house, they'll redo the load calculation, and that will be what determines whether the capacity of the service panel is exceeded. But this calculation here, this assigned capacity calculation, is meant to be a starting point for understanding how that works. So, adding an EV charging station. Suppose you calculated an assigned capacity of 100 amps. Supporting the 32 amp EV charging that would be fairly typical requires a 40 amp circuit, and therefore the assigned capacity has to go to 140 amps. That's straightforward. Now, the issue is whether the assigned capacity is more than the total capacity of the service panel, in which case you need to start thinking about a service panel upgrade. Now, what electricians actually do is what they call a load calculation, and this load calculation procedure is defined in the electrical code. It takes into account, for instance, an estimate of the amount of lighting required to light the number of square feet in the house, and that turns into an electrical load in order to drive that lighting. And another thing it would take into account is the presence of a washing machine, dishwasher, refrigerator, and the typical usage profile of each of those devices. How likely are you to have the air conditioner going at full, plus the dishwasher, plus the clothes washer, plus the pool pump, plus the this, plus the all of that? How likely are you to have every single last thing running at the same time? That's unlikely. That's what the load calculation takes into account. So for that purpose, it's best to hire an electrician to perform the load calculation, and they'll be in a better position of advising you on whether adding an EV charging station will fit into the electrical capacity of your house. The assigned capacity calculation we just led you through again was meant to be a starting point on understanding what the electrician will be doing and what the electrician will say to you. And you're less likely to end up with an electrician if you understand something about what they're talking about. If you're able to talk knowledgeably with the electrician, then I believe you will be less likely to be led astray. So that's my hope for this video. So thank you for watching. I hope this has been useful. And I am David Heron, the Green Transportation Examiner. You can find out more about this topic at greentransportation.info. And thank you for watching.